Okay, my book report and presentation are on one of the earliest books by Gore Vidal, a book called The City and the Pillar, written in 1948. It's about a young boy, actually a high school junior, and his friend. The boy is Jim, and his friend is Bob. And Jim is a high school prodigy, and his best friend is Bob, who is a year ahead of him and is about to graduate high school. Bob has big plans of going and joining the Merchant Marines, and Jim doesn't want Bob to leave. And Bob says, "Well, you can come with me." Jim is very shy, tall, athletic, very good-looking young man who has never had any kind of experiences at all in life, except for his friendship with Bob and playing tennis. Anyway, Bob and Jim, right before he leaves to go into the Merchant Marine, they go to a cabin by a lake, and they have a time together, a really good time that Bob later refers to as dirty kid stuff, but Jim just is totally happy with, and that becomes the whole quest of his life. Because when Bob leaves and gets out of touch, all Jim can think of in his life is getting back together and being and continuing his friendship with Bob and the thing that they shared, wanting it to continue. The year he graduates, he goes to New York trying to find trying to find Bob. He has all sorts of adventures. He becomes a cabin boy, and he meets somebody as a cabin boy who takes him to Seattle, trying to get him hooked up with a girl. And of course, Jim can't handle that. He's scared and he just flees. And as he's leaving, he hears his friend Collins say, "Oh, let the queer go. I've got enough for the both of you." He and the other two girls. Anyway, Jim can't stand to see Collins anymore, so he jumps ship as a cabin boy and goes to Hollywood, thinking that that'd be a new start. He gets a job as a tennis pro, and he ends up being like a kept boy for a movie star there. I kept thinking of Cary Grant when they were talking about this guy. I'm not sure why, but that's what it reminded me of. Anyway, he goes through these experiences not only with the actor, but with the playwright and with the playwright's friend. And in every single encounter that he has and every single experience he has, all he can think about is Bob, and that his life will begin again when his relationship with Bob starts again. Um, he knows he'll find him. He knows that that he is Bob's twin, and that the two of them together will have a complete life. He ends up going into the Navy. He has all these experiences that I write about in my report. I just didn't want to read the report. I wanted more to just talk about it a little bit. Because to me, this book was all about, I think, a struggle that all of us go through at the beginnings of our lives when we're trying to figure out who we are. The problem is that when this was happening to Bob and so many other people, how Gore Vidal so eloquently writes about it, this was in the 1940s. This was right before and during World War II, when anything but the heteronormative thing about marrying, having children, and being, a family man is just totally unheard of and totally a sin and totally terrible. And anyone who acknowledged that would have to be underground in a subculture. The thing is, Jim figures that as soon as he is with a woman, then he'll be a normal person, and that he's not interested only means that he loves Bob, and this search for Bob and his experiences. And it's a very interesting long book about his experiences, trying to learn about who he is, denying who he is, because he thinks, well, as soon as I see Bob, I'm learning and I'm enjoying. And he was self-sufficient. He got out of the military because of arthritis, and he had a disability, and so he had his life again. He finally goes back home. I think it was Virginia where he lived, and he had very strict parents and a very strict upbringing. But he ends up going back home, and his mother, of course, his father's died, and his mother says, well, you need to, hopefully you'll settle down with one of the nice girls here, and you've had your fun traveling around and everything. But no one knows that his quest is to find and continue his life with Bob. And so Bob, in the meanwhile, has been in the Merchant Marines, and has come home and is going to marry his high school sweetheart, and does that, and then goes back, and then Jim comes home, and darn, he and Bob are finally going to see each other because it's Christmas, and Bob comes home on leave, and he's married now, and has a child, and everything. And Bob and his wife invite Jim over for dinner at Christmas time afterwards, and they have a nice evening. And everything that happens, everything that is said, Jim sees innuendo, and Jim sees that Bob and he are really going to have their life. It's going to even be more different and important, because even though Bob is heterosexual, he has affection for Jim, and they will be able to continue their lives together too, even if Bob is actually married. So a year later, Bob is on business and goes to where Jim lives in New York, and they go and get drunk. And as Bob reminisces, Jim is thinking that Bob is building up to what they're going to resume, and they lay in bed drunk. And when Jim tries to fondle Bob, Bob is all of a sudden awake. Bob is very upset, and they wrestle, and Jim ends up raping Bob and leaving. Now, in the original version of the book, this is the 1965 version, I think it was, and it was redone. In the original version, Jim gets so mad that he actually murders Bob. But in this version, he just rapes him and leaves. Now, the beginning of the book starts with this drunk man in a bar, and this is our hero, Jim. But he's drunk in a bar, and he's accosted by a female in the bar, and he can't handle it. He's just drunk and just in his own world, and he reminisces. And the whole book starts, chapter 1 talks about this drunk man in the bar, and he's reminiscing as to how he got there. And at the end, it brings us back to where he's in the bar reminiscing. And I think the book was just fabulous in that it not only showed the difference between acceptance of yourself and acceptance of anything other than the binary in our society. People are in search of who they are now, and are able to accept who they are and become who they are. We're back in Jim's day, if you will, or back in the 40s and 50s. That was just totally not possible unless you were in, like I said, a subculture. But Gore Vidal says at the end of the book that Jim realized he's standing at the water's edge. Maybe he'll go back onto the boats and into the military, or as a seaman. And he's standing there, and he says he realizes that nothing changes, but that when you go back, everything's changed. Nothing stays the same. So that's trite, but the way Gore Vidal puts it is just amazing. And I write, I elaborate on that in my written one. This might have been a better report had I just read the report, but I didn't. I wanted to kind of talk about it a little bit, and just talk about how we all kind of are in denial about certain things about ourselves. And maybe this book in a way gives people who read it now an understanding of who they are, and of how they can do better, in accepting who they are. Anyway, this book had a profound effect on me, and I highly recommend it. Thank you.